Thanks. Okay, thank you everybody for coming to this meeting. Can we have any apologies? I don't think we've got any apologies, have we?
And Phil was excused himself to go.
Yeah.
I think we did have apologies from John, but John's here.
Yeah.
And then I don't think we got apologies per se, but the Fire Brigade Union, Fed and Unison.
Yeah, okay, great. We have some minutes of the previous meetings and actions. Can I just make a comment on the minutes, actually? Charlotte, you've done a fantastic job with the minutes, but because this is live recorded, you don't need to put all that detail in them.
Okay.
So if you could just go back to the previous version of the minutes from the last meeting and follow the same format and just provide the links so people can watch the content, then that makes life a lot easier, and it also means that you don't have to write all of those notes for this meeting as well. So that's great. Thank you very much. So if we go on to the actions log,
No updates to the actions.
there are no updates. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Any questions from the public?
No.
No? Okay, that's easy then. Okay, so I think we are Phil.
Thanks, Julia. Yes.
Welcome. Is this the first time? I think this is your first PAM?
It is.
Yes,
Can
so
you tell?
welcome. Yeah, you're all right, thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry, can I just ask, do you mind if we chip in, or do you want to get to the end of your presentation?
Either way,
Because
that's
that might
fine.
be
Just,
challenging.
yeah, feel free to chip in as we go.
It's a bit of a double act because we're sort of taking it in turns, so
Okay.
feel free to ask questions as you go along.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right, super, thank you.
So we're going to talk to you about major incident preparedness and national resilience in the fire service context. But as you'll see as we go through the presentation, it is very much about a multi-agency approach, which you will notice throughout as we go through. So to begin with, I thought it'd be useful to talk about community risk in terms of sort of like major incidents and what might impact upon North Yorkshire, and to give you an overview of how that community risk is identified, analysed, assessed and then responded to. So at the very top, produced centrally by government, is what we call the National Risk Register, and within that there is identified hazards and threats. So hazards are generally what would be called by, say, natural events to either infrastructure, industrial, etc., whereas the threats, unfortunately, which exist are related to the malicious threats, such as terrorism, for instance. So the National Risk Register is then considered at a local level within North Yorkshire, in fact, within every county in the United Kingdom. And those risks that are contained within the National Risk Register are analysed in the North Yorkshire context. And I've listed a few on the slide there, which that list is, as an example, it is not exhaustive. But as you can see, there are a number of risks which could impact upon North Yorkshire and cause what we would determine to be either a major or a critical incident. So obviously top of the list, fire, given that I'm giving a fire sort of presentation. But with fire, obviously, a fire that affects infrastructure, for instance, would have a massive impact on either part or all of North Yorkshire, as an example. Severe weather, we are very used to experiencing severe weather events, including flooding, obviously. And then such and so forth, such as pandemic influenza, an industrial incident, utility failure, and so on and so forth. So those risks are actually contained within our local community risk register, and that is then made available in an overview format to the public, so the public can have an understanding. It is available on the Local Resilience Forum website as to what risks are present or potentially present, which may impact upon North Yorkshire as a whole. Also within that public document, following like the overview of the risks, there are certain elements of advice in there, such as for business continuity management for businesses within the community, etc. And reference to community emergency plans, which is quite often where, say, parish councils, neighbourhood watch areas would combine together, certain streets would combine together and provide their own community resilience by responding in an appropriate way in the event of an incident occurring. Now, moving on from that, wanted to talk to you about the North Yorkshire Local Resilience Forum. I've already mentioned that, but just to give you an overview as to what that is, and the reason it follows on from that community risk is this is the body that does actually do the analysis of the risk and considers what is required to be put in place to make sure that we can respond to the risk adequately. So local resilience fora exist across, again, the country, broken up basically into county level, of which ours obviously is North Yorkshire, which the acronym for that, we love our acronyms, is NILERF. And as it says, it's a non-statutory body with mandatory requirements under the Civil Contingencies Act. And again, I did say that it is very much about a multi-agency approach, because this forum in itself consists of a large number of agencies, which is broken down into different categories. So category 1 organisations include, for instance, the Blue Light Emergency Services, local authorities and NHS bodies. And category 2 includes other agencies such as Health and Safety Executive, telecommunications, transport, utility companies, etc. The whole purpose really of that local resilience forum is for all of those agencies to come together to form the forum in order to assess the risk that is present to us in North Yorkshire, to prepare plans, to train against those plans, training exercise together, and then provide warning and informing to public and other agencies, businesses, etc. within the community as and when is necessary. So very much part of that forum is to put in place emergency management steps. So mitigation is about understanding the risks, very much encouraging that partnership working and making sure that as all partners we are aware about what the risks are and what we might do in response to them. And part of that obviously is the preparation, so being ready to respond to an incident, putting in place emergency plans, again training, developing longer term recovery plans. It is a continuous loop as well, so it's about learning lessons from previous incidents or incidents that have happened to us or elsewhere, establishing links also with other counties, so again that we are prepared should we need to be able to call upon other counties to assist us should we need to. Response, obviously reacting in the event of an incident, so initial emergency activities, initial damage assessment, and again very timely warning and informing all other agencies and the public, more importantly. And then after any incident there is the recovery phase as well, which again the forum looks at putting in place measures to enable the community to recover in an appropriate way.
Phil, can I so do you get a sense of, I mean there's been a bit of discussion amongst PCCs and PFCCs recently around LRFs. Do you get a sense of how North Yorkshire's operates in comparison to others?
Personally, I'm relatively new to the structure that you can see there, because I actually currently chair the risk assessment group, of which I've held one meeting. But my gut instinct, my initial reaction is that we perform pretty well compared to others. Certainly from the commitment that is provided from all agencies around that table, I see it as a really positive environment. And Stuart will actually talk to you a little bit later on about some of the processes that this LRF undertakes, which are actually being looked at from a national perspective as being best exemplar in some cases.
We're inspected, aren't we? And we've been inspected quite recently. We also regularly do peer reviews as well. North Yorkshire is an advanced LRF. You would expect it to be so, I think, because of the geographical challenges and environmental challenges that we face, and some of the things that we faced in the past. So we are really well practiced, and we do so much exercising. Not just around flooding, but around terrorist incidents, around things like the fracking, but then looking at so what happens if the area around the frack site would have flooded, and how would that impact on the community. All sorts of different things. We regularly come together and exercise, and they're peer reviewed as well. HMIC, FRS, Coleman inspectors, and they've just met with me actually in terms of our LRF. But we're inspected from all different angles, and it feels to me, having sat on the senior command course with other colleagues around the country and done some operational exercises on a national front that are actually ahead of the game.
Yeah.
But we do keep challenging ourselves to improve as well. So that's my opinion. Having sat on it for the last 2 or 3 years, it's not an area of business that I'm really concerned about, but it's an area of business that we're continually striving to improve because the risks are so significant.
Yeah. So, referring to the structure there, I thought it would just be useful again just to show you how the LRF operates and what involvement both police and fire have within that as well. So at the head of the diagram there we've got what we call the strategic group, which obviously gives that strategic direction, the priorities, etc. And that's chaired by the Chief Exec of the North Yorkshire County Council. And then underneath that there's the coordination group, which is really the driving force of that forum. Now all of this is administered and supported very, very ably, I must say, by the Secretariat, which is provided again by North Yorkshire County Council. So the coordination group would then consider outcomes from the risk assessment group, which you can see on the right, which, like I say, I've just begun the chairing of, and then that is progressing. Obviously all the good work that's gone on before me, again I must say that it's in a really good place. So that National Risk Register would feed into the risk assessment group, for instance, and those risks would then be analysed in a North Yorkshire context. And from that analysis we would then decide, is there any, well, the coordination group would decide, is there anything that we need to do in terms of what plans do we need to put in place, etc. The coordination group would also then feed across to the training and development group to say, right, okay, there are some actions needed to be exercised or trained upon, and that's then when the training and development group would take that and put into action those recommendations from the coordination group as well. So as you can see, again, we've got a group manager sat on the training and development group from the fire service, one on the risk assessment group, and the coordination group is chaired by a chief inspector from North Yorkshire Police.
So Phil, as chair of the risk assessment group, what are the key risks for North Yorkshire?
So, referring to that initial slide there, pandemic flu is, in fact, this isn't for public consumption, but you'll see just from the extent of all of the risk on this sheet that there's a great many risks. So when we look through those ones that are put up on the initial slide, so risk from fire, anything that affects that infrastructure of the county, certainly pandemic flu, they're the risks that would affect widespread areas or population. So as Stu's just associated as well, adverse weather events, which then subsequently results in flooding. And it's not just, I suppose, the impact upon the population of North Yorkshire or the actual county itself, it's what the services need to do to be able to respond to them as well, which is part of the equation in analysing those risks.
I think it's important to remember that many of the risks that are there are set nationally at a national level, and they get disseminated out to local areas with a view to then those areas then grade them for severity. So certain areas will the same risks and hazards sit right the way across the national piece, and then we will add different local ones at the level that they would only be pertaining to North Yorkshire or a particular county. But the National Risk Register, we then feed back through the LRF into the National Risk Register.
So the reason that this discussion has arisen amongst PCCs is because of Brexit, and some areas LRFs having all sorts of plans in place with regard to Brexit. So Kent in particular, for example, Essex. So a number of areas have plans in place, and so I suppose the question is how do we assess the differences between threats and align our plans with national plans, and how does mutual aid work within this context?
Could I help on Brexit? I've done the local police gold for that and been linked into the LRF in consequence of that. So there's similar sort of profile. The same chief constable who leads on sort of multi-agency work around major incidents had the national goal for Brexit preparations, and nationally again a separate risk register was created, disseminated to all forces, and they graded the severity of each individual risk. We did that in company with both North Yorkshire County Council, City of York, Fire, Ambulance, and other sort of key sort of partner stakeholders, and our risk assessment was on a, well, by the end, on a weekly, almost daily basis, fed back into the region to make sure that we were all ready, and then we were then able to assess our ability to provide mutual aid set against the various requirements. As you've rightly said, I mean, Kent had an awful lot on because they were the key port. Exactly. But we were picking up support for the likes of Humberside because they were one of the sort of decanting ports and things like that. So it was quite a rigorous structure which we've now got held in reserve a little bit up until the end of the summer, subject to whatever happens on the political climate. But we're doing similar preparations for the likes of the European elections and so on, and feeding the same structure. And that's how it sort of worked thus far.
Because I think the public have been very unaware of this area of work and how agencies work together, not just at a local level, but how that links into sort of national preparations. And I think that's something that would be new to a lot of people.
DCLG, Department of Communities and Local Government, sit on the LRF as well, and they sit on all the LRFs. So you might have a regional link sitting on several different ones, so you're not thinking about how do government reach out and look at the difference going on and what all the preparations are. That's quite well established as well.
I think some standing regional meetings, so the Emergency Planning Department from North Yorkshire County Council, I know they have regular catch-ups with the chairs of their LRFs in the region, just to make sure that anything that we're assuming from a support point of view, we can rely on, it's robust, and vice versa.
I forget who just mentioned it, but anything that's bespoke to North Yorkshire, so if it didn't appear on the National Risk Register, it can be raised at our regular meetings. So the Risk Assessment Group does sit quarterly, and it is a continually monitoring process. So our Community Risk Register, each of those risks will have a review date dependent upon the risk rating, and they are reviewed regularly. They're assigned generally to an appropriate agency for that review, so we divide the work up in terms of who it is appropriate to put that to. So when a risk is due for review, for instance, an agency will have performed that review, which is then consulted upon within the Risk Assessment Group. So it is a continually monitored process, a live process. And
presumably, I mean, when events happen in other parts of the country, then that will have an impact. So, you know, the Manchester bombings, Grenfell floods here, Cumbria, wherever, that all learning, presumably there's a proper and appropriate channels for all of that learning to be disseminated out to local areas.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the Kerslake report on the back of the Manchester arena bombings was considered by the LRF, and the learning from that was taken, again divided out to each individual agency to put into place their own action plans, which then contributes to that multi-agency approach. And in fact, from a fire,
No, go on, first that.
From a fire service point of view, we took some of that learning and realised that early communications at that incident were a key issue, let's say. So we've put plans in place ourselves, so if anything like that occurs on whatever scale, we now send somebody straight into the police force control room to have that early engagement, so that we have that communication very instantly at that time. So, you know, lessons like that we do very much pick up on quite timely as well, to make sure that we put ourselves in the right place going forward.
I'll let you finish because you've answered my question.
Okay, thank you. So, underneath, underpinning all of that, as there is with any mechanism, any function, is the very vital communications piece that is required. So there is a communications group, which is again chaired by North Yorkshire County Council. And that's about, you know, generating that one standard message as a local resilience forum, so that there's no contradictory messages going out from individual agencies, whether that be in downtime, as it were, or in the event of an incident. We can channel our communications through a single point of contact and get a standard message out that is correct, that is, like I say, not contradictory from other agencies, you know, putting out different messages. And then underneath all of that, if there is any specific areas of work to be done, then we can push that down to the subgroups, of which you can see along the bottom there, which could be a task and finish type group, you know, set up, do a specific piece of work to then stand down again. But that's done on the fly almost as and when it is necessary. Stu, over to you.
So I wanted just to highlight response to major and critical incidents. As you can see from the definitions up there, we're fairly comfortable with definition of major incidents and the police's definition of critical incidents. We didn't tend to be reasonably au fait with dealing with major incidents and that formal multi-agency communication around coordination groups at a tactical level and also at a strategic level. And this is probably a good example of the LRF reviewing its practice and trying to identify areas where it can improve. And probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we identified that although we're good at the formal setting, that early alert to other services that we've got an incident that, although it might be fairly standard for the services and the agencies that are actually at it, it might have a big impact on some of the other agencies. So probably the example that set some of this running was we had a fairly basic road traffic collision. I think it was on the A66. Fire services tended along with the police, fairly run-of-the-mill, not a lot of injuries, but it did involve a bus with some school children on it. And it was that well into the incident before anybody thought, actually, what am I going to do with these children? And so out of that, we devised the RMCI, which is a way of, and a lot of training gone into control room to make them more aware of this. Incident commanders are now more aware, so they may prompt and start this process. But it's basically collecting some initial information about the incident, putting it into an email and just sharing that with a distribution list of all the potential agencies, the Cat 1, Cat 2 responders that Phil talked about earlier. And then it's up to individual agencies to say, actually, that's something we might be interested in, we'll get some work out of this, we need to do something, put some plans into place, or actually it's just useful for awareness, but we don't think there's anything for us to do now. And we've gradually evolved that, and it works really, really well. And we actually use Resilience Direct, which is a national created website, a secure website, where we can share multi-agency information. So the LRF groups, the coordination group, they use Resilience Direct to host all the minutes and any supporting documents. But it also allows us, at a dynamic incident, to share information on that portal.
I remember one of the interesting ones was the school incident where they everybody started fainting.
Right,
yeah, which ended up, I think, being studied academically as some sort of mass panic thing. It was really quite an interesting event, actually. And that had quite rapid ripple effects across the county, because people obviously quite rightly really concerned that something major had happened in one of our schools. But it's also then how you sort of stand things down and sort of settle people down when something like that happens as well.
And that was about getting the right agencies there, aware at an early stage, so we can have those group discussions as to how we're going to approach this and what, and looking at sort of shared situation awareness of what is the risk, what is actually happening. So I think we've talked about Kerswit. So all the joint working is actually based against the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Programme as it is now. It was originally a project about 6-7 years ago when it first came to be. As I was touched on, we're fairly good in the formal setting of working together, but what was identified through various major incidents was that on the operations, actually at the incident ground, we weren't potentially as good as we could be. And so the project group devised 5 basic principles on which all our joint working is now based. And that is about co-locating, so making sure that the incident commanders on the ground are actually stood next to each other and are actually talking to each other, hence communication. And it's not just about talking about the groups that are there, but it's making sure we invite any other agencies who might be required, and also about talking up and down within your own organisation, make sure that your briefings are accurate. And that coordinating that joint response then, it isn't just about one agency, it's about making sure that we're all cited and coordinating the multi-agency response. And we do that by sharing our joint understanding of risk. So what is a risk for fire might be slightly different to what the risk is for police or even ambulance or any other agencies. And so by talking about that and explaining what our risk is, we get that joint understanding of risk, which leads to that shared situation awareness for what are the objectives, what are the police's objectives, what are fire's objectives, and then from that we can use the joint decision making process, which is just to your right there. By putting all the information together, we can assess the joint risks and develop a working strategy. We can consider all the different agencies' powers, policies and procedures. So again, that's taking into account the legal requirements, what are the standard procedures that we would normally use, how do we need to operate outside those for any reason. And that allows us then to come up with a range of options. We normally have a plan A, but we always like to have a plan B if that doesn't produce the results that we're expecting. So it's about having a range of options that we can agree on. And then through that joint decision making model we'll agree on one course of action, but what is important is that we review that, so we're constantly reviewing, is it actually giving the benefits that we think it will, and if not we can go back to our contingency plans, but we will kind of keep running that loop as and when we need to, just to make sure that we're on track. And I talked earlier about the RMCI and that initial information from an incident. And one of the things that Jessup has done is give us a clear communication path that we're all using the same language, and that is actually methane. So all agencies now, and this was initially used by the ambulance, and we've all adopted it. So is it a major incident? Is it going to cause call on resources greater than any one agency can actually deliver? Do we need those extra specialist resources? We're clear on exact location. We understand what the type of incident is, whether it's aircraft, whether it's a wildfire. What are the hazards that we know are present, so we can actually see and aware of, or what do we suspect we might come across as the incident develops. Access routes, so do we need to have a rendezvous point where we collate all the oncoming appliances and staff, and what's the safe route, what's the best route into that incident. An idea of number, type, severity of casualties, what do we know, what do we suspect, and what type of injuries may they have, and then what resources have we got, and that's not just fire, that's any other agencies that we might need. So what have we got at the moment and what we're likely to need as we envisage the incident progressing.
Can I ask, you may or may not know, but for example, West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue and the Moor Fire and Ilkley,
Yeah.
at what point does that go to a sort of this level and then get reduced to a fire-owned incident, and then you sort of scale it back up if you need to, or does it stay fire until you say we need extra help because it's out of control, or there's smoke going to the village? No,
so that again, they would share that information at early stage to see what their agencies required. So I don't know the detail, but I'd imagine if there's potentially for evacuation, then the police would need to be involved. So we try and get all the partners, anybody who's potentially going to be involved together in early stage, have those discussions, and then as it progresses, it depends which way it goes. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the options that we can bring in later.
So using the RMCI process within North Yorkshire would give that early alert across all agencies, some of which would read it and think, thanks very much, delete it, whereas others might then start preparing for a potential response.
Okay.
And then it's no surprises when we call, say, tactical coordination group to discuss this sort of like the wider issues.
So it's sort of on notice.
And what's interesting and really useful about the JESIC principles that you can see on the screen is that they can be used at pretty much every level. So boots on the ground, or from a more remote command point of view, that we're still all talking the same language. Some messages from the incident ground getting fed into tactical coordination groups and strategic coordination groups. It's all really basically following the same model.
So Resilience Direct are very good at supporting. So if, for example, the floods in York are very well practiced here, and they'll send out an early message, and there might even be a pre-telephone call before you would ever think about setting up a coordinating group. And it would be the same if an incident looked like it was going to grow. They can send a notice out to all the relevant agencies and pull together even a virtual coordinating group for a phone call before they ever need to meet. So it's fairly well practiced here.
So on the York floods that happened on Boxing Day a few years ago, on Boxing Night I called a strategic coordinating group, and we were all still at home because it happened that quickly, if you remember. But all the chief execs from around the county and the city all met, and I chaired that group, and we had all the infrastructure in place probably within about 45 minutes of calling the meeting. So whilst we exercise a lot, we've done it when we've really needed to as well, and it's worked.
And the JESIC principle, all Blue Light services have committed to this, so we all receive training, so we've got that really good understanding of this process. And from a fire service point of view as well, we've now included it in our standard debrief form as a section by itself, that how well or not so well was JESIC used. So again, we can keep that learning going and improve, continual improvement going forward.
Phil, I'm going to try and keep this meeting on time.
Okay, I'm going to talk
So
a bit quicker.
we've got 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the overview in terms of how that multi-agency response responds to the risk that is present within North Yorkshire. This now centres in on what the fire service brings to the party. So from a county perspective, what you can see on the screen is the resources that North Yorkshire Fire Service provides. So we have 38 fire stations, and you can see from the geographic spread they are very well spread, and there's a reason for that, and that's because of the expanse of the county to enable our resources to be deployed effectively. We've got 46 fire engines, a mix of different types of fire engines within there, and as you can see there's a number of different specialist units which would then provide additional support dependent upon what sort of incident type we're responding to. And then at the bottom of the list there you can see that we have what we call 4 national resilience assets, which I'll go on to talk about in just a moment. So when we respond to major incidents, at the time of the call it's always the closest resources that go first, because of the travel distances, time, get our resources there quickly. If we then ask for further assistance and it starts to ramp up, we start bringing resources in from further afield, and as we do deplete our resources in the county, we would then put in cover moves to keep the fire cover, the emergency cover at an appropriate level, and if necessary we would then start to call upon our neighbours to come in and provide some cover for us as well.
So we touched on national assets, so there's various assets that are held across the country that we can call upon. So we've got high volume pumps, we've got urban search and rescue, so the nearest one for us is West Yorkshire, but if you've got a building collapse, they have specialist equipment such as listening devices so they can identify hopefully where casualties are, and then we can tunnel down in a safe manner to rescue them. We've got detection, identification and monitoring, so if we've got a hazardous chemical release, it's important for us to identify what that chemical is. If it's in a chemical environment, a commercial environment, there's a good chance there'll be signage and things that will home us in on what that is. If it's not in that environment, it's sometimes very difficult to actually identify what the chemical is. So we have, again, a team in West Yorkshire. Unfortunately, the acronym is DIM. It's not the best one, but it's... and they've basically got a portable mass spectrometer, so they're a piece of equipment that they can bring across, they can test the chemical and just give us an idea of what it potentially is, and then we can put the necessary control measures in to try and make it safe. Again, if you're moving a lot of these national assets around, you need an enhanced logistic support just to help you coordinate and manage those resources, and that's like an enhanced control unit, and it comes with specialist subject matter experts that can give us specialist advice depending on what the incident involves. Water rescue, and we've also got modern terrorist attacks, so we have what we call NILOs, National Interagency Liaison Officers, who are security cleared and are given basically counter-terrorism awareness, so they are able to liaise with the police and ambulance NILOs and have that greater understanding of the sort of counter-terrorism arena.
So within our county, within this fire service, these are the national assets that we actually host. I've provided some pictures because sometimes it's hard to envisage exactly what these things look like. There's a bit of text there that describes each asset as well. So the top 2 pictures that we've got there, what we call our high volume pumps. Large capacity pump, able to pump large amounts of water, either say from a flooding type of environment to somewhere further away, or sometimes operating as what we call an overground main, so providing firefighting water for operations on scene. We've got 2 of those sorts of lorries each located at Richmond and Harrogate, so 4 in total, but 2 lorries make 1 high volume pumping unit. So one carries the pump and the other one carries more hose, 3 kilometres of hose in total. So then these assets you may have seen in the news over recent years, they do get deployed quite extensively and quite regularly, and we have deployed ours both within and without the county on a number of occasions. Quite rare that it goes out of county, but it is there as that insurance policy almost, so based on risk rather than demand. But we do, and we are starting to use them more and more over within the county as a resource that we just automatically call upon when we need it now.
So, talking about resourcing to risk and resourcing to demand, who and how do you decide what national resilience assets you host? So,
Yeah, so these are determined by the government.
Do they pay for them?
Yes, they are funded. They were originally provided as part of that national strategy, and now the maintenance and the upkeep of the assets, once they were sort of like given to the fire services, is still provided through funding from the government. So in general terms, yes, they do pay for them. And
so government decide, can you then top up, or so odd's not the right word, but given what we've talked about, flooding being the best example of some of these incidents, is there one type B flood rescue unit?
Yeah.
That seems low for a place that floods a lot.
Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there, Will, but from a national perspective, given that these resources are strategically located throughout the country, what we're able to do is then call upon, and there's a couple of slides coming up talking about 2015 floods actually, which shows how many of those sorts of resources were called into North Yorkshire at our time of need. So it is very much on a national, sort of like based on a national risk register moreover. Where do we need to deploy these sorts of resources, strategically speaking, across the country?
Is that continuously done to know they're not in the right place because they keep getting, exported to York or to somewhere else?
It is reviewed.
If you look at the mass decontamination unit, so again that's based at Acomb. We used to have two structures, so we can decontaminate about 150 people with each structure, so we had the ability to do 300. But nationally they've not been used that much, so part of the national framework is to review that. So last year that got reduced down to one unit, and there was the national programme to reduce and look at that. So it is constantly reviewed, but it is that strategic national picture rather than a county-wide perspective.
And it might be located...
we are going to run out of time.
Sorry. Just very quickly on that point, what we do have to bolster that though is we have 5 Swift water teams within North Yorkshire who are specially trained to enter water and perform rescues and so forth. So this is just from a national asset perspective. We also have our usual normal assets within the county. Moving quickly on.
Sorry. We do need to...
I won't spend too much time talking about this other than to say that we do train to be able to maintain the competence against not just these assets, these national assets, but also all the equipment and engines and vehicles that we utilise within our fire service. So there is a training cycle in place. And we do often join in other national exercises as observers, etc. So receive the learning from elsewhere.
So cross-border wise, on the Fire Services Act, there's 2 main sections regarding cross-border working. Section 13 allows us to call upon additional resources from neighbouring services. Usually if we've got a large incident near the border, then we'll utilise neighbouring services assets. And Section 16 is where we've got an area of the county that we know that a neighbouring service can actually get into quicker than we can. So we discharge our responsibilities to that neighbouring service, and we sign an agreement, Section 16 agreement, so they will maybe send the first pump or the first 2 pumps, and then we'll back up from there on. And the final point in there is risk information. So we actually categorise all our commercial premises on a risk score. The very high risks, we would actually have a tactical information plan, quite detailed scenarios of potential incidents. And what we've realised is that we need to share that information across borders, so we now have an agreement with the 7 neighbouring services that will share, again utilising Resilience Direct, any risk information that we have on premises within a 10 kilometre stretch of the border.
So requesting, as Stu said, simply just to request a neighbouring resource, we would just phone through to the control room and say, can we have please, and invariably we will get what we ask for, but they will determine their own level of risk at that time as well. From a national assets point of view, we make one phone call basically to the National Control Centre, which is now based in Merseyside. We have a discussion with the experts there, and they will then assess nationally across the country what is available and what is the best resource to provide for us if in fact it is appropriate, because that discussion will be had, do you actually need what you're asking for?
And they have that national overview of what other incidents are happening, so the flooding might not just be happening in North Yorkshire, it might be in other areas, and there might be other potential areas coming up as the weather front moves through, so they have that bigger picture and determine where best to send those reserves.
And then we can call upon the military as well, but to do so we'd have to be absolutely certain that we do require that, and we cannot cope by ourselves, and there is a protocol that we follow that goes all the way up to ministerial level actually for that one.
Well, that did with York with the
It
floods.
did, yeah.
didn't it? Yeah.
But it is available. From a local resilience point of view, we quite often have what we call our spate conditions. There's certain triggers for that. It could be, again, adverse weather, it could be flooding occurring, it could be increased sort of like environmental conditions resulting in wildfires, etc. So from just within the county, we have a procedure where we ramp that up. When we think it's on its way, there's 3 levels. Level 1 is warning, so getting ourselves ready, setting up major incident rooms, possibly getting ready to call in staff, informing neighbouring services, control rooms, etc. Then when it actually occurs, we think it is occurring, we're in level 2 now, we go for it and actually provide the resource to be able to respond to that effectively. And of course, same as what I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that recovery phase, it's the same for us internally. It's the stand down phase for us, you know, putting back everything into its place where it was normally before we began. And what we've got, which we've developed locally as well, is what we call our bronze command hubs. So instead of our control room allocating all the jobs during spate conditions, what we can now do is for the control room to dump a load of jobs for an area on a local control almost, a bronze hub, for that commander to be able to then allocate resources that they have available to them at that hub to where they deem fit, given the local picture. And what that does very effectively, it reduces the burden, the pressure on control. Because as you can imagine, we quite often get a lot of calls coming in to a control room which often has maybe up to 4 staff within it. And also to ease that pressure as well, we are now in collaboration with Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service. The thinking here is if it's happening to us, then it might not be happening to Cornwall, given the difference in distance between us. And therefore Cornwall can take calls and actually action calls from members of the public on our behalf. And then I think, Amanda, you mentioned about the 2015 flooding, and I've said on this, well, it'll never happen. Well, it did, and this is really just a list over these next 2 slides of the resource that we called upon into North Yorkshire. So as you can see, the first item on the list is 535 emergency calls for a 24-hour period, which for our control room is a massive amount, given the size of our control room and the staffing within. And then I'm not going to rattle them all off, but you can see from the 2 lists here the sorts of resources that were deployed either by ourselves internally, but also bolstered up from a national resilience point of view to enable us to deal with the floods effectively that were occurring mostly around the York area. And as you can see, it culminates there at the bottom of this with the 1 Chinook helicopter that was flying around
I remember the
throughout that period. And of course we had, as you mentioned there, Julie, the 1,500 troops on the ground as well.
Can I ask one question? Who pays for all that?
I've got some figures for you. We pay some of it, as the fire service pays some of it, but there's something called the Bellwin scheme, which will pay 0.2% of your revenue budget. So for us, we had to pay around about £60,000 of what was a total bill of £363,000. So centrally it was funded around about the £300,000 mark. We had to stump it to £60,000. But like I said, there's that threshold that has to be reached for us then to be able to draw upon or apply for the Bellwin scheme funding.
Which is similar to
major incidents.
And one more thing, just to show that we reciprocate the arrangement. Just recently, the West Yorkshire wildfire incidents were mentioned. We did actually send 2 fire engines for 2 days across there at a national resilience request. And we also sent under the Section 13 type request our wildfire unit from Skipton that spent 3 or 4 days over there, and that was just the weekend before this one, wasn't it? So
there were Manchester fires before
and of
that.
course Winter Hill, Lancashire, Manchester, of which we did spend quite a lot of time over there as well. So it worked both ways.
Do we cover that cost of sending the
again, because those incidents, certainly the Lancashire and Manchester ones, were at that threshold, we were able to apply on a standing charge rate to say we think this much, can we have those costs back, which were then funded from elsewhere.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you.
I've got one more, but I won't ask it.
No, well, we're 10 minutes over time,
yeah, sure.
so.
I've made notes.
Not that brilliant.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Thanks. That was really interesting. I think a lot of people will be very surprised at the list of assets deployed in the floods.
Yeah.
Very significant.
amount.
Yeah. Okay, Leanne, are we on?
Okay.
Thank you.
So myself and Superintendent Westcott are going to be giving you a presentation on female offenders. There are quite a few slides to get through, so some of them I will be rapping through, but they're there for reference for members of the public to have a look at. Okay, so the female offender, I'm going to give you some national context around a strategy, followed by some stats, followed by some local context in North Yorkshire, and in particular where North Yorkshire Police is developing in terms of female offending. Okay. So, coming on to the national context then, there was a national female offender strategy that was published last summer in June. It was put before Parliament by the Secretary of State for Justice. It sets out some minimum government commitment to a programme of works around female offenders, and our very own Commissioner has been very closely involved in the national discussions with regards to this, and also continues to sit on an expert panel, a reference group, with regards to that, championing a whole system approach in relation to women offenders, which builds upon other reviews that have been done in this area in terms of Baroness Corson's seminal report, which is a review from 2007 actually, but that highlighted factors that can cause offending and how women and men respond to interventions, but also Lord Farmer's review, and I think a further commissioned, or whether it has it been commissioned yet?
I've been sitting on it. The report is awaiting publication.
Okay, so and that is having a look at how females engaging with families can lower recidivism to assist in addressing intergenerational crime and offending. Okay, so there are three priorities on the board there: early intervention, community-based solutions, and custody as an effective and decent, to be as decent as possible for women offenders. And when we look at some of the background to this, we can see there a list of areas that the study have come up with, including vulnerability can clearly drive offending behaviour, and whilst women are in the minority in the CGS, those that are in contact with the CGS do have complex needs that can't be tackled by one agency alone, and they often have poorer outcomes and distinct issues which require a tailored approach. And some of the reasons for that on there's a higher prevalence of need amongst female offenders, including mental health problems and self-harm, that many experience chaotic lifestyles which are often the product of abuse and trauma, and we'll come on to that in a little bit more, and that almost 60% of female offenders have experienced domestic abuse, and that more female offenders are primary carers than their male counterparts, and that prison sentences are mainly for non-violent, low-level offences, but persistent, but they can have a disproportionate impact on families and children. In fact, almost 72% of women sentenced to custody were sentenced to 6 months or less, compared with 56% of men. And they were from figures taken in 2017, and that the reoffending rate on release from prison remains too high following short offences. And that is for women 56.1% nationally.
There's a massive issue here. There's an absolutely enormous issue here.
Yeah.
And if you look at the evidence, I mean, it is really interesting. There's quite some evidence to suggest that there's quite a lot of discrimination built into the system, in all parts of the system, including the judiciary, and so it is really interesting. If you look at the type of offences that women are sentenced to jail for and the length of their jail terms and all of that, it is really interesting. There's very significant case for reviewing this very substantially.
Yes, absolutely. So, and 3 in 5 women are recalled to prison after serving short sentences, and there's very much evidence there to suggest that short sentences don't work. And the intergenerational
impact can be profound.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's because people say, well, why should we treat women different to men?
Yeah.
There are lots of good reasons to look at different interventions for women and for men. Yes. It's not about treating them differently, it's about doing what works.
Yeah. And interestingly,
the point is they are being treated differently because of the disproportionate.
There's bias in the system. Yeah.
Interestingly, the rate of self-harm incidents in prison for women are nearly 5 times as high as men. As well.
And if you talk to governors of female prisons, they will say that nearly every single one of them has got some sort of trauma in their background.
Absolutely, yeah. So the strategy is identify 7 key priorities, which are there on the board, which I'll quickly rattle through. Addressing substance misuse problems, which is obviously to stabilise and address individual problems, and in particular to address Class A drug use and binge and chronic drinking. Also for mental health problems, just mentioned there, to expedite access to services that address mental health problems, in particular anxiety and depression, personality disorder, PTSD and trauma, to improve family contact, to help women to build healthy and supportive family relationships, especially with their children, to build skills in emotion management, to help women to build skills and control impulsive behaviour and destructive emotions, to help women resettle and build social capital, so to help women to find somewhere safe to live, and learn how to manage their money and access education, improve their employability, to help women develop pro-social identity, so we should encourage and reinforce a positive non-criminal identity in women in our care, and we should enable to do good for their community, good for others, and use this to help them to change the way they describe themselves, basically, and also to help women believe in their ability to control their lives and have goals, which is to motivate women to believe that they can work and to achieve their goals. So those are the 7 priorities identified in the strategy. So looking now at how this turns to what does this mean for us in North Yorkshire, we are going to just quickly go through some key stats. So you'll see there on the board that for over a period of 5 years that we dealt with, in totality, 652 offenders. And when you take out some of the repeat offenders in terms of the repeat visits, it actually comes down to individual offenders of 11580, which is 21% female offenders, and that has been decreasing over the 5 years from 2014 to the current day. That is still a significant proportion of females, and it has increased slowly from 20 to 21% overall in proportion. Having said that, there is a similar trend for males, proportionately, but the figures are less favourable for women. And if we just quickly go on to the next one. Yeah, is that right? Do you want to? Yeah, if you do that. I can't multitask. If we quickly go on to the types of offences for women, you'll see that most of the offences that are prevalent are shoplifting, in particular, or hence the low-level type of crime that is more common, and also violence, and some of the drug offending, but I think 22% of drug offending of women, they're offending on behalf of others, so there's some of their vulnerability. But if you quickly just go on to the males, there's similar in male offending in terms of comparison, but there are additional drug offences there for women as well.
So your computer playing up.
Yeah. Sorry, you want?
Leanne, is the different types of shoplifting? You know, so there's shoplifting, there's nicking, I don't know, an iPad to sell on, and then there's nicking a loaf of bread to feed yourself.
Yeah.
Can we differentiate that kind of thing?
Yes, so there are different categories of theft, and theft and shoplifting in particular is the category that's highlighted in terms of the highest area for women. So we have also theft of others and theft of bicycles, how it's recorded in terms of the crime recording. But yeah, so even though we're having shoplifting is down for over the 5 years, a 33% reduction, it is still increasing proportionately. Same with violence and, as I say, drug offences. Interestingly, fraud offences have fallen quite significantly. That's which is above average. I think there's 58% downward trend in relation to that, which actually goes against the national increase in fraud, which is quite interesting. But yeah. So as I said, the most nationally, almost half of female prisoners said they committed an offence to support the drug use of somebody else.
Yeah.
And there is a chart on there for males, which I probably won't go through, but it's there for you to review as you people may wish. So if you just quickly go on to the age profile, you'll see there that the highest age profile of female offending is 31 to 50 bracket, and the second obviously it's 18 to 30, and that further supports where the work that there is a requirement for earlier intervention and prevention to divert women, reduce criminality among females.
Yeah, given what you said in one of the first slides, the vast majority then of female offenders between 18 and 50 and are likely to some degree to have dependents. How does policing try and deal with women they're coming into contact with who might know they've got family at home or single parents and all that kind of stuff?
So we come on to a few areas in terms of North Yorkshire and how we deal with offenders a little bit later.
Okay. Yeah, sure. That's all right.
Okay. So in terms of moving on to the next one, rearrest and reoffending, there is some research there which shows the difference in offending rates for women and men. For women, 23.2%, and that is actually a little bit lower than the national, but nevertheless still too high. But when we look at females coming out of prison, that significantly increases in terms of the reoffending rate from short prison sentences. But overall, that figure there on the board, those figures do not include, for the purposes of this presentation, do not include wider beyond North Yorkshire. That's just based on our figures, because it's difficult to try and get some of those figures from our current systems and work through them. But
the new information that we
will have will be able to give us better intelligence certainly working with our partners in the CRC and probation, so that is encouraging, which has been quite a long time coming. Okay. I'll just go on to the next one. The next slide just shows a bit of footfall there in relation to voluntary attendees compared to arrests, arrested females through custody, and it effectively shows that that females are more likely to be dealt with via a VA, which is a voluntary attendance, than males, and that females accounted for all 26% of all VA interviews. But obviously over the years arrests have fallen in all categories across custody, and those ones coming into custody are more aligned or akin to sort of violent type offences, because they're more appropriate for arrest, if you like. So okay. And outcomes, there's just a few details on there in relation to outcomes. Interestingly, nationally, there's a recent Prisons Reform Trust report published, which shows North Yorkshire as being quite favourable in terms of its outcomes with regards to immediate imprisonment rate for 2017, and that we're at mid-table, and that it's measured nationally on the basis of per 100,000 population, and in North Yorkshire the figure is 27 women per 100,000 population, which has continued to drop by about 11% since 2012. But that's but the highest area in the country, by way of comparison, is 67 women per 100,000, not too far away from us in Cleveland, and we're also lower than that of the rest of the Yorkshire Humber Regional Forces, and only just above Durham, interestingly, who have checkpoint, and they have 25 per 100,000, so we have 27. So Sussex were the lowest.
So the figure that stands out for me, and I know you're going to come on to it, but is the diversion figure there is very small.
Yes, it is. It is small, and I think when we're looking at this context, really, there's a lot of developing areas in North Yorkshire, and further that we can do, certainly, to increase those referrals. And I think it's still, relatively young in terms of some of the areas that we're able to proceed and invest in, but we are doing quite a lot of work to highlight.
I mean, it's interesting because when it's anecdotal feedback from police officers are sort of on the ground is people's knowledge of these disposals, and also going back to the point about why should I treat women any differently, and then thinking, well, they've done this X, Y, Z, why should I treat them differently from a man, and not knowing that there are schemes in place through which they can be diverted and getting that embedded. I mean, Al, you'll know a lot about this area of business.
Yeah, the only thing I will say is I did speak to Paula Eccles very recently, and some of the integrated offender management workers, the officers that are working with this to go through the triaging process for the women that come onto the scheme. I'm quite reassured that actually Paula and team have put in place some auditing per month of those women offenders to see which ones may have fitted the scheme that didn't actually get an opportunity to go on it, so we can learn some lessons and a bit of 360 feedback to some of the decision makers that lie out on area.
But there are some questions around the criteria as well, aren't they, and whether we've got those right.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, because I think there is a 2-year period for those women that are probably entrenched in terms of offending that we instantly think are not suitable. But actually, have we really addressed the underlying original issue around domestic abuse? As you can see on there, is 60% of female offenders, or drug or alcohol abuse. Because I think we do have those commission services in place to pick up these women.
And it links into things like adverse childhood experiences and all of that stuff.
Yeah, because it's not just the women that are affected, it's all the kids.
Yeah, I mean, Wales have done some really interesting. There's some really interesting work in Wales around some of this, around ACEs.
Yeah.
And I you know, we're relatively early in our journey, I think, around some of this.
We are. I mean that board there also shows a range of different out-of-court disposals, and nationally that's being reviewed as well in terms of the sort of how that can be condensed, and that will I think make things a little bit easier in terms of how we consider those assessments and referrals.
And it's having the pathways in place as well, because you've got to have somewhere to refer someone to.
Which is absolutely pivotal to the reform around the out-of-court disposal sort of structure, really. Moving on from that, I mean, female offending is very broad, and you could pick on a number of different areas, but obviously because of the limited time, the next few slides are going to concentrate on what we're doing in North Yorkshire. And as you say, Julia, it's very sort of, in some areas it's quite early days, but also some promising projects coming up that we'll cover. So I'll pass across to Al, who's going to update on the next two slides around community safety hubs.
So Al, we've got about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to combine, Commissioner, I'm going to combine community safety hubs with neighbourhood policing because they're kind of connected with each other. Now, I think you'll probably know that from the community safety hubs perspective, we have 8 multi-agency hubs of varying sizes across the force, which work slightly differently to each other. And it's fair to say that in terms of women offenders, there is no specific targeting of women offenders or rehabilitation. It's very much based around Thrive and the threat, harm and risk that individuals cause to the communities. And within that, we will and have and always do pick up those individuals that cause us or our communities the most harm. And I think the really good thing and developing thing when I speak to the inspectors and I speak to the community safety hub managers like Sandra Rees, Jane Mowat, is that the idea or the understanding will be as the CORMA system, the case management system develops, we will create that one system portal on how to manage the information from the various multi-agencies in a systematic approach, and also that problem-solving aspect of how we deal with problems within our communities.
So if you look in other areas, so we visited, as part of the North Farmers Review, I visited some services in Gateshead, and they have just an automatic gender-specific approach. They do it for other types of cohorts as well, so they'll have a specific approach for veterans, and that is either a more coherent approach to the way that interventions are commissioned and provided. And I think we've got quite a long way to go in developing a gender-specific approach. I don't think we've really started that yet. I think we've got some opportunities in the future to do that, but I think there is good practice elsewhere that we know about, but we're just starting to understand, I think.
Yeah. I mean, when you speak to the inspectors and you speak to the case management or the community safety hub managers, they will give you examples of when we've had quite complex cases with female offenders coming across, certainly from Scarborough, landing on us from other forces with really complex issues in children. And when you speak to, certainly I use Scarborough, and I don't keep meaning to use Scarborough as that, but it's quite a mature model in terms of working with health and the mental health CAMS and everybody around the table to promote that multi-agency tasking. And what you're seeing with a Corman now starting to develop is that portal used to task individual people. So we've got that audit trail of what and when people are going to be doing some actions around these individuals. One particular case at Scarborough was a street worker that came to us and targeted a number of vulnerable people as a result of that. So looking at the sort of threat triangle around victims and location and those suspects, we were taking and looking at some key elements of that offending history using the SARA model, the scanning, analysing, then responding and then assessing how we've done. And with partners and using that CORMA system, it provides a really structured problem-solving approach. And what we've done with that and her children, who were subject to DV, as we can see from there, is getting that CAM support through through that mental health team that were working with this individual. Sadly, she had to take a criminal justice disposal simply because of the systemic nature, or the in-depth nature of her offending history, which was quite significant and focusing on vulnerable people. So she went through the criminal justice down the criminal justice line for her to deal with her offending. And then you've got at York, in terms of female offenders, are quite a really complex individual in social housing, supplying drugs. You look at the case criminal community support hub or community safety hub, picking up with the local authority closure orders to remove that threat to the community. So whilst we don't particularly target female offenders, I think there is a long history of how we've tried to deal with it in a multi-agency environment.
But it's not about targeting female offenders. It's about having pathways that are gender specific.
Yeah.
And we haven't developed those. And I think we've got an opportunity with the new Women's Centre to start thinking about it in a different way.
Which is the next slide.
All I'm just going to talk about, just in terms of the work that we've done from a safeguarding perspective, a partnership perspective, and with the commanders working with the response sergeants and the neighbourhood policing team sergeants and those sergeants that are decision makers within the community safety hubs. We can't forget that the work we've done with safeguarding champions, with getting the sergeants to do a number of modules around dealing with domestic violence, not just from a responding perspective, Commissioner, but actually just understanding what happens to a female victim of domestic violence after we've left the scene, and following that journey through IDAS to kind of get an understanding of the importance of doing some of that follow-up work around the PPN system, the public protection notices now. And I think the feedback we've had from them sergeants having 3-day attachments with the safeguarding team, the IDAS, and working with the local authority, the MASH, etc., or MAST, it's been really positive for some quite entrenched thinking. So, hopefully that all starts to join up and understand some of the kind of antecedents of some of the challenges that women face. And that's good, I think.
Okay, so building on that, as you will be aware, Commissioner, the Women's Wellness Centre that some of your commissioning managers have put in a bid, successful bid to the Ministry of Justice for a women's centre in York, which is due to hopefully go live in the autumn.
Before we hope.
Before in the autumn, right? Okay.
We were there this week, yeah. We went and visited it this week, yeah.
Excellent. So that's a really significant step forward in being able to bring this gender-informed approach, and there are currently a number of centres across the country, I think 32, but this is our sort of first one.
Well, no, we did have the Cambridge Centre in
yeah,
Scarborough,
right.
but that closed down in 2015 because of the transform and rehabilitation reforms.
So, and there's also, as well as better outcomes for the women involved, there's also a lot of evidence to suggest reduced cost of society. So for every £6 saved, for every £1 spent, plus wider £16 of wider economic value created for every pound spent, and also the reduced reoffending between 1 and 9% of the areas that have been looked at thus far. So we will have a service provider commissioned, as you say, sooner than the autumn.
We're just looking at.
We'll look at that.
Yeah.
And hopefully this will be a really good opportunity for partners to engage and collaborate with us. And there's some everything we were talking about earlier in terms of what it will be able to provide. So I think that will help us to develop a lot of our referral pathways. So that's really positive. Okay, sort of moving on then to the next.
Can I give you 3 minute warning?
Right, okay. Yeah. Domestic violence protection orders, it's on there, there's some figures. That is really just to show you that we're supporting earlier intervention. 60% of women in custody supervised have experienced domestic violence, so I won't go any further on that. And looking at the police custody experience, which is clearly different to the wider custody experience, but actually has a lot of similarities and a lot of similar regulations. From our perspective, we are very heavily set up to ensure that vulnerable needs in custody are assessed fully and are met. HMIC, FCRS and AP authorised professional practice gives us quite a strong framework in which to work in with regards to how we look after females in custody. There's a very long list of conditions that we would apply, so things like if females wanted to speak to a female member of staff, they could do, and we actively give out leaflets in custody, for example, in relation to feminine hygiene products, etc. We work closely with the ICBs around highlighting areas of service in terms of improvement, just to ensure that females in custody have a positive experience in North Yorkshire, given the circumstances, and that they are treated with dignity. Okay, so quickly moving on then to integrated offender management. Again, this is an area that is quite, whilst the IOM model is not new, the new Trinity model is, and this again will includes women diversion as part of that, and individual needs are assessed throughout all of the stages in relation to this approach, which will include women's individual needs, and in terms of their circumstances around family, housing, as well as obviously their criminal activities, and whether or not they can receive a dedicated approach or focus, or whether they're dealt with in a more sort of general and alternative way without being part of the programme. There's quite a complex scoring process that goes on, and this is very much then assessed by a multi-agency panel on a monthly basis, and the individual pathways are developed to those individuals. And whilst a little bit what Al was saying, it's not necessarily specifically for women, it will take individual needs into account. Moving on from that, there is the Women's Diversion Scheme, which is specifically for women, and we will ensure through custody that those highlighted and referrals are made as possible, as well as referrals from other areas, that will also be assisted with the implementation of liaison diversion that's coming in to all of our custody suites in July, but also will link in with these other initiatives in terms of NHS commissioned, identified vulnerabilities, and partnership approaches and pathways. So that they all converge to a certain extent in terms of opportunities. Okay, so that was probably a very rushed process of Trinity, but and female offenders. But if you've got any further questions you want to ask around that in terms of Women's Diversion Scheme or anything else, clearly there are a lot more slides that I've not been able to cover, but conscious of the time.
Right, thank you. I mean, there's a lot of concern around recalls to prison for women as well, and whether that is higher than men, and that sort of stuff as well. So I suppose that there's the work that we can do through IOM and locally around that, but then obviously there's the sort of working with criminal justice partners more widely and looking at those types of issues as well. So it isn't just a police process, it requires that engagement of our partners.
Very close working with health partners, with CRCs, with BELSHAM, other courts, and they're all engaged in the processes along the way at various points in terms of either the LID or IOM. Yes, so.
Okay. All right.
I was going to say, Commissioner, I hope you, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying, but at least the slides are going to be available. There's been a huge amount of work at short notice gone into this, so big thanks to Leanne and also to Alex, his day off today. So he's coming to present it today as well, so I'm really grateful to both.
Okay, well thank you very much.
And I'm also going to pick up the rehabilitation and reoffending thematic lead as the partnership hub.
Okay.
That will come to Mark Calm as he takes over in the future. But I am going to pick up with your office this week some work that we're going to look at around framing what the thematic lead looks like.
Okay.
Because some of this can be pulled together centrally by ourselves.
Okay, and will you be working on the thematics, haven't you, as well? Looking ahead?
Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Amanda, I think we're over to you now.
We are. Commissioner, you asked me some time ago to start and take a look at presenting back to you in terms of lessons learned in terms of Operation Kingfisher, which was the North Yorkshire Police response to fracking. So I've just brought a few slides today in order to do that, if that's okay. In terms of lessons learned, there are a number of things that we've done which I'm going to cover. One is debriefs. The other is we were inspected by HMIC FRS because we submitted a special grant bid to the Home Office in which we were successful, and that resulted in us having an inspection process in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, which lots of other policing operations aren't subjected to. There was also an awful lot of contact from the public, which we've taken into account. We utilised body-worn video in terms of our learning, and I'll just touch on some next steps as well as I go through, if that's okay. So it was always our aim to provide a consistent and coordinated policing response to any protest activity. This was something new, both nationally and in terms of North Yorkshire Police, because the motivation behind the protest activity was quite different to what we'd seen in the past. So we've had an awful lot of protest activity over the years, both in York City Centre, out into the Scarborough area and other areas as well. But this was motivated in order to impact on the economic and commercial interests of a company which at that time was Third Energy, who had a licence to commence hydraulic fracturing in North Yorkshire. So the motivation in terms of that protest was really different to anything we'd experienced for many years, probably going back to industrial disputes years ago. As a result of that, we did an awful lot of learning around the country. We spent significant time down in Sussex. We spent an awful lot of time and deployed officers actually across into Lancashire. We got Lancashire to come across here and test all of our plans, and we engaged the services as specialist barrister to try and get as match fit as possible before the commencement of the operation. We continually looked to see how we could learn from it, and we took an unprecedented step actually of carrying out structured debriefs during the operation, and certainly part way through we did a full structured debrief, which normally that would occur right at the end, but we decided to do that halfway through, so we were able to take the learning from that as well. Okay. We did, when the Home Office employed HMIC FRS to come and inspect us, there was a detailed analysis over the course of just over a week actually to assess the operation and its value for money. That inspection concluded that the policing was efficient and effective, and ministers have agreed to cover 85% of the additional costs for us of the operation. That amounts to £614,000, and the additional cost to North Yorkshire Police were just a little bit more than that. So that actually means that we've been able to put that money back into our reserves, which is where the original funding had come from. So that's really good news for the public of North Yorkshire. They found that North Yorkshire Police had prepared well, that we sought advice and learning from other forces that had dealt with similar situations, and that we took their knowledge into account when planning. They talked about what the Gold Commander had done in terms of implementing gold, silver and bronze command structures, and the detailed plans that we had across all of those command areas. And these plans were also reviewed by peers from other forces, as I've said already. They concluded that the use of the resources were reasonable and proportionate, taking into account the huge scale of the operation, the associated threats and risks, which the force took steps to mitigate. We adopted a collaborative and non-confrontational approach in our effort to protect the rights of all concerned, despite making, I've got to say, 90 arrests during the operation. The resource was closely monitored, and expenditure was monitored throughout. We made stringent efforts to reduce costs where possible. The police response needed significant resource. To reduce costs, we worked to meet operational requirements from within the force, rather than relying on the expensive option of calling on other forces for mutual aid. I think we went for mutual aid on I think it was three days in total, and that was because the protest numbers at one point in time really swelled to the point that we had to go for mutual aid, but it was only for a few days, and then we went back to just using North Yorkshire Police resources after that. We also had to respond, of course, to the wider policing needs of this large and diverse county and city. We considered the effect of diverting those resources from their usual place of business in order to meet the demands of the operation. Cost-saving measures were implemented throughout, so instead of paying officers overtime, we cancelled rest days, which obviously really impacted on officer well-being, and we've had to re-give those rest days later on, so there has been an impact, no doubt. We had to give adequate warning for that, but we did build that into the plans, and we tried wherever possible to not pay overtime at the enhanced rate by cancelling rest days, and the overtime was paid actually if officers worked more than their, at that time, 8 hours tour of duty. We looked at well-being, and that was number one on the agenda of the gold meetings throughout. At one point in time, we deployed a welfare vehicle to the team, and I know where we talked about sharing some body-worn video, and you can actually see from that, and actually on the social media open source, just some of the things that officers actually had to put up to within the tour of duty. It wasn't easy, and we always looked at morale. There were several referrals to the Occupational Health Department, and we had a dedicated welfare officer that sat on our gold and silver groups. We also, of course, had to consider the travel arrangements. Really big county, people live right across the four winds and beyond, actually, of North Yorkshire. We had to make sure that people could get right across to Kirby Misperton every day, and that was a challenge in itself because of the geography of where Kirby Misperton is.
How did you manage the welfare, the sort of continuous elements? So there might be a really difficult day where you've got a support in place, but the sort of the challenge of dealing with the same thing over and over and over and over and over again for an extended period of time.
So we did lots of rotation. The bronze commanders on the ground looked at what staff had been subjected to that day. If necessary, we pulled staff out. We also were quite strict in terms of prosecutions, so there was malicious complaints made against officers. Some of those were of a sexual nature, which has really impacted on them, and that was put straight out onto social media. We reviewed the body-worn video before the tour of duty, and the officers were being able to be deployed the following day with their heads held high, with the complaints not being substantiated. That alone really boosted officer morale. Actually, some of the staff left behind to deal with the day-to-day business of police in North Yorkshire reported significant welfare issues because, of course, the staff on the ground was less. So we had two things going on really in terms of officer well-being. We've considered how the deployments of officers from around the county had an impact on business as usual. We've taken the opportunity to review what future deployments would look like. We've got an opportunity actually because we've got a different shift pattern in place now, and I've already been negotiating what was with Third Energy in terms of what the policing footprint will look like next time, how that shift pattern will look a little bit different. It gives us an opportunity in terms of taking different staff every day and commanders not knowing which day their staff are going to be deployed, to using a dedicated pool of officers that are rotated in and out over a couple of days, but we are a dedicated pool of officers, so that should allow commanders the opportunity to be able to manage workloads in a really different way back on the ground as well. I'm pleased to report actually that people are quite keen to be involved in Operation Kingfisher. When we started out, nobody wanted to be involved in it. Actually, it was a positive experience for lots of staff because it's something a little bit different, utilise their skills in a different way, and we do have sufficient officers coming forward now and to want to try and assist us in the future.
I mean, I think it would be fair to say that you know, I mean, it was obviously a huge operation and was always going to have an impact. That we did get members of the public noticing that their regular officers were not around.
Yes.
You know, the people did notice the impact of it. So it is good to see a sort of slightly different approach for the future to try and sort of mitigate that impact. And I think that's really welcome.
I think it will mitigate it at times, and most times we're deploying up to 100 officers a day. That'll be the same again. The community will notice the difference again. We're just going to try and manage it in a slightly different way, but the impact will still be there. Body worn video, we introduced this just as we were getting going really. Really welcomed by the staff. Really allowed us to mitigate complaints. None of the complaints that were made were upheld, which is really good news for us. It stopped the malicious complaints, and when we talked to other forces in terms of how we dealt with that really quickly with the turnaround, we were able to nip an awful lot of complaints in the bud. There was other forces who had a number of officers who'd had serious sexual allegations made against them in terms of managing the crowd. That wasn't the case for us. The minute that we started to take action, things changed. The other thing that we did with body worn video was learning in terms of the tactics used. And I've got a video clip that I'll be able to show you in terms of when we had a lorry surfer and the tactics that officers used in order to try and safeguard that person, put their lives at significant risk. And it was only at the end of that shift when we were able to play that body worn video back that the officers realised just how close they'd come to actually losing their own lives, and that learning was really fast. And so the following day we used different tactics straight away. Community disruption. We had all sorts of things to balance, didn't we? So we needed to allow and facilitate peaceful protest. That's enshrined in law. We also needed to allow Third Energy to go about their commercial business, but we also had to balance that with the needs of the community. And without doubt, we said from the very beginning that there wasn't anything that we could do within law that would mitigate sufficiently that community disruption. That was always going to take place and was always going to happen. But we did try really hard to mitigate that, and we're going to continue to do that next time, and again in a slightly different way next time. So we within the local community as well, which is what made it even more difficult, we had tourists coming in and out just on their day business with families in tow, not wanting to sit in queues of traffic, other visitors as well. We had transient populations. We had members of the community who were anti-fracking and part of that protest activity, and actually some of those members of that community have now deployed elsewhere around the country and continue to be arrested in terms of some of the actions that they're taking. We had people who were peacefully protesting from among members of the community. We had people who were neutral. We had people who were actually pro-fracking as well. What the majority of those people had in common was they just really didn't want it on their doorstep and really didn't want that disruption taking place amongst their community, and that was really difficult for us to manage. What we tried to do was a community-based policing approach. We deployed protest liaison officers to discuss things with people. We used a no surprises approach, which is part of the approved professional practice of the College of Policing. We held community meetings. We wrote to people, we used social media, we used other media outlets. We did absolutely what we could in terms of communicating. The one thing that we've done when we've gone back to Lancashire is looked at actually how regular were the commander type, silver type meetings taking place in the community, and we actually think that we can do more of that next time around. So we've already started to discuss matters with some of our partners, and we've already talked to the outgoing commander, and we will be picking up with the incoming commander, who is Andrea Kell, in terms of their commitment from a local policing perspective of what more they can do to try and support us in terms of the operation going forward. And we've got lots of things in train already in terms of that.
Was that the community type meeting, did you mean?
Yes.
So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think the local community would welcome that.
Yes.
I think it was really challenging.
Yeah.
And I do think they felt that the focus was on the protests and not necessarily on the community. And I think and I think that's not to say that wasn't the case.
It's just we need to
Yeah,
demonstrate it.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, also I would also like to point out that we did get some good engagement from both HMCTS and CPS with the community as well, where we had a community meeting as well. So, and that's unusual to get criminal justice agencies engaging in that way. So that was really helpful as well. It was good to see. So, and just also, Amanda, the HMIC, I mean, I met with the chap who came to inspect, and you know, they couldn't have been more impressed really by the way that the operation had been run. And I know you were the gold commander, so thank you very much. It was well done.
Thank you. Thanks. And that concludes the presentation.
Can I ask one quick question? You've mentioned you were liaising with Third Energy, and they've now been sold. Does that have any impact on the future? Anything regarding fracking?
I've no idea. Obviously, we've seen it play out in the press, and we're yet to see. We'll obviously pick up where we have left off in terms of the engagement that we have with the company, in the same way that we have engagement with the community and other stakeholders as well. So
I'd imagine you've learnt lessons on that front as well. Get engagement with the company.
It seemed to work well, but it's a difficult set of circumstances for the police to find themselves in, trying to balance all of the needs of all of the people concerned.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. John.
Yeah.
So this is to provide an update on the year-end outturn on performance. So the report I'm going to present covers the 1st of April 2018 through to 31st of March 2019, and it covers two areas really. One is how the public have performed, and then secondly how we as a service have performed in terms of our ability to respond to incidents. And so we attended 7,124 incidents in 2018-19, and that's an increase of 11% on the previous year, which was 6,413. Now, within there, over 50% of that, or around 50% of that, are false alarms, and that could be false alarms due to automatic fire alarms, or false alarms by the types of incidents that we've actually arrived at, being perhaps controlled burning and other factors. It's interesting the types of incidents that have gone up. So the total numbers of fires attended have gone up by 16%. The total number of animal rescues have gone up by 43%. And again, that is largely probably because we've got introduced two large animal rescue units. So naturally, because we've introduced new units, then they get called to more incidents. So that could be agricultural animals, it could be horses, that type of thing. But obviously we've done some awareness on the fact that we've actually got these units now, and as a result we've attracted some calls. Malicious calls have gone up 35% in the last year.
Do we know why?
No, there's no real reasons why this is, other than we do know when we share information regionally that the deliberate fires and malicious calls have gone up, and that's a national and regional picture. No real detail as to why at the moment.
Does malicious mean kind of trying to cause difficulty, or just a false alarm in another? It's
generally a false alarm malicious, so it's someone dialing 999, or pushing a break glass point within a school, that type of nature. Incidents that have gone down are fires in domestic buildings, people injured within fires, and national flooding incidents. The number of flooding, obviously, last year we had a really good summer and fairly mild winter, and so therefore, the numbers of those are down accordingly.
Going back a little bit then, John, total number of fires attended is up quite a lot.
Well, our five-year average is 6,749, so it's not a significant amount in the overall 5-year average. But again, nationally, it's a 2% increase last year.
2% increase.
2% increase. So we're slightly above the national average on the increase of last year.
So that's interesting, because obviously there's a narrative around demand for the fire rescue service coming down. Obviously a 2% increase, if it's just in a 1 year period, you can't tell much from that. It would be, obviously the police have seen quite significant increases in demand, so it'd be interesting to see if the fire service are starting to mirror that over a longer term trend.
That's true, and there is debate nationally now about the demand issue, and we're feeling it's about plateaued, but we need to then identify if that is actually increasing now any more than the 2%. But it's not a significant amount in the last year, but that's something which we need to keep an eye on.
So, but when, from our point of view, if we're looking at resourcing going forward, which we will be doing, it's trying to understand the future demand that we may or may not have going forwards, because we could make some interesting decisions around all of this if we're not careful.
We could, and demand for the fire service is affected largely by behaviours which we can influence, but then also largely by the economy and by the weather, which we have less and no influence on. But you're right, Julie, in terms of the future resourcing of our stations and our vehicles and our people, we do need to consider future trends, which are clearly quite tricky to guess. But the last couple of years have seen a plateau and then a slow increase in the number of calls that we receive and incidents we attend, and that follows probably a 10 or 15 year steady reduction in those numbers. Yeah. So we will need to keep an eye on those and consider those when we're deciding where to put our resources, and also to consider the types of incidents that occur in the county and the city, so that we can resource appropriately to the local risk in terms of weather events, for example, on the moors and in the rural towns, and then the property type and high risk incidents that we attend in our more urban areas, and decide what type of resource we want to put in those places to deal with that demand.
And that's going to be part of the adjustment to the IRMP.
Yes.
Yeah. The integrated risk management plan.
And the future integrated risk management plan come 2021.
Yeah.
So, not necessarily to go into now, not something for the meeting, but do we understand why total fires have gone up, and, for example, were they preventable? And is this wildfires, for example, they might be increasing now as a matter of course because of the type of weather we've got and we're warmer, all those things, whereas some of them might be, I don't know, cigarettes burning out and all those kinds of things. So
this is an area which we recognise, which we need to sharpen up on really in terms of analysis of this type of information. Obviously the year-end stats have only just come in. We need now to do some deeper analysis and understand what's going on and why.
But the figures that you can see in there, interestingly, for domestic fires, so that's in people's houses and apartments, it's what John alluded to earlier on, they fell last year quite significantly in percentage terms, but then the total number of fires in non-domestic buildings, so in shops and factories and businesses, showed a slight increase. So we do need to do more work to identify exactly where these incidents are occurring, not only in the types of property that they occur in, but whereabouts those properties are, so that we can target our resources to prevent them. But the hot summer last year would definitely have affected the total number of fires that we attended, because so many of them would have been small grass fires, large grass fires, wildfires.
So that might be a continuing trend then, and it's for ourselves to respond to that rather than domestic
You predict we're going to have a nice hot warm summer then?
But hopefully we will have a nice hot summer and people will behave themselves very well and avoid having fires. But because they'll be careful and they won't set deliberate ones. But climate change is increasingly an issue that's being discussed within the National Fire Chiefs Council, and over recent years and longer term, the number of weather-related incidents appears to be
less rain, more heat.
Well, not necessarily, because you then might get more flooding as well.
No,
So,
well, it's extremes, isn't it? So it's
yeah,
it's also
yeah,
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, very concentrated periods of wet weather which creates the floods.
So the other increase we have seen is a 13% increase in the number of road traffic collisions which we attend, and I must say it's which we attend because we don't attend all. But we have had an increase, and however, those killed and seriously injured within those types of incidents are approximately the same, very much.
Again, very conscious time, but is that an indication of seriousness or just sort of something else?
It could be, it could be weather related because it was a good summer, more vehicles, more...
No, sorry, I meant, would you normally respond to more serious types of RTCs?
Yes.
So I totally understand it's not all of them because you don't go to them all, but you would go to the more serious ones.
It's generally where people are trapped. The other one which I need to report within all of this is that we have not had any accidental fire deaths over the last 12 months, which is very positive compared to 3 the previous year. Turning the page to look at response, and this is how we perform. So we have a response model which covers 4 areas. Maximum, we've got 46 fire appliances. We have an optimum figure which we aim to achieve of between 35 and 45 available, a minimum which is 32 to 37 available, and then we go into a critical level which is 32 or less. And at table 3 that shows how we performed against that standard. I should say that we've got 46 appliances, and ideally yes we would like to have them all available all of the time, but we've got to also build in there an amount of resilience. So we factor our resilience on being able to cope with 2 10-pump incidents simultaneously, because often we'll get a number of different incidents at the same time. So whilst we've got 46 appliances, we can operate and do operate with less than them. And similarly, we use that resilience factor to enable crews to go off and do training to maintain competence, etc.
I've got to ask what happened in August.
Well, August, I can only say a large proportion of our fire service within North Yorkshire is retained and on call, and that means that a large proportion of those fire stations, it's summer holiday period. We do rely on primary employers releasing staff from work. It may be, there's a whole range of different factors that contribute to that. Families have got to go on holidays, they've got to do it within school term time, work around school term time, I should say. Factory closures, there's a whole range of different factors which feed into there, and so really when you look at that from June through to September, that is the area where we do fall into that critical area. How we mitigate that, recruitment, retention, we're working very, very closely. We've invested heavily with 4 district watch managers who are now really focused on recruitment. But wider than that, we do recognise that we really need to look at the remuneration package of on-call firefighters. It's a national issue, but we can deal with that locally as well.
So that if you top that up, that's nearly 20% over the course of the year that is at critical or minimal levels, which is quite significant and illustrates that issue around on-call firefighter availability.
Yes, and from value for money terms, the best value for money is 100% available, because at the moment a fire engine is sitting in a building creating cost, it's providing no value for money whatsoever. As long as it's available, then it's providing good value for money, and the on-call service provides extraordinary value for money when those fire engines are available. So a massive priority for us over the coming years, it isn't a quick fix, is to solve the issue of on-call recruitment and retention, how we resource those stations, the type of vehicles that they use. There's a wide range of ideas that we've got to start to implement to hopefully address that issue in the longer term, to get closer to or at 100% availability.
Yeah, it's not an easy fix.
But it's really important it's fixed.
Yeah.
It is.
For the safety of the people of North Yorkshire and indeed firefighters as well.
Now, obviously, you brought in the OSR as part of the fire cover review.
Yeah.
How is that working?
It's effective because these figures are after we've done the deployments of the OSR. If we didn't have that, it would be a far worse picture.
Right.
So this is after we've moved staff around, and we do that on a daily basis. We have a duty silver officer looks at this in conjunction with control twice a day, and they will decide where resources go, and that includes the OSR. So it is effective.
It is complicated though, isn't
but
it?
very complicated.
Yeah, I've seen it in action. It is very complicated.
And it can change, so we can deploy someone to a station, and by the time they get there, the current situation has changed, and so they're no longer needed. And so, so it's a dynamic situation which moves.
There must be
equally inefficient.
Yeah, but
Yes.
there must be at some point in the future some sort of app or something that must be technology that must help with this. They probably haven't. Nobody developed it yet.
No, they are available.
Are they?
They are available. The OSR is a really interesting one because it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Whilst we've got the problem with on-call availability, we need an OSR, and the OSR comes at a cost.
Yeah.
If we could solve the issue of on-call availability, then we wouldn't need the OSR, which would give us further money to invest in the on-call to further improve their availability. So there isn't a single means of solving the problem of on-call availability. If it was easy to fix, it would have been fixed. But there's a number of things that we can do that I'm fairly sure will vastly improve on-call availability.
And it's also lifetime information, isn't it? So if you're in the control room and you're juggling all of the different sort of resources, and somebody's gone off to Whitby, by the time they get to Whitby, they get there and somebody's cannot come on duty. That person has driven all the way from wherever it was to get to Whitby for no good reason. And if there were a technological a solution that allowed a firefighter to say, right, actually, and it was all fed into the control room and said in 15 minutes so and so over there is going to come on duty and all the rest of it. There's a technology could really help with this, and at the moment you've got a technological barrier, which is the lack of linkage between systems in the control room.
And on that particular one, it's Vision and Firewatch are our two systems. I'm informed that the testing of those is now going ahead, and we should be in a position shortly where those will be live and speaking to each other.
Okay, so everybody's going to jump for joy when that happens.
That should be a huge relief.
Yeah, it will. Yeah.
Really interestingly, on the issue of on-call availability and the use of these systems, and it's something we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. There's a case that's gone through the European Court, the Matzak case. He is a volunteer, which is the same as our on-call firefighters, although all paid, in Belgium, who took his service to the European Court on the basis that the time that he was restricted in his movements because he had to be at home within 8 minutes of the fire station, he should be paid, and the court found in favour of that. So the legal advice that we have taken nationally through the National Fire Chiefs Council says that the risk of legal challenge for the way that we employ on-call firefighters can be mitigated if those on-call firefighters can, without recourse to any action against them, take their fire engine on and off the run with impunity, so that they have the freedoms in their own lives to be able to do that. Of course, that potentially has an enormous effect on the availability of our on-call crews, because they can take them off the run at any time that they like, if that's the route that we have to go down. So there's more work to be done around the legalities of that, and when we're developing a new means of paying and contracting our on-call firefighters, we'll need to bear those legal issues in mind.
Yeah.
So the table 4, information table 4 I should say, shows how we balance overall availability on each station on a month-by-month basis versus how many staff they've actually got on each of those stations. And there's some real success stories on there. Some of the stations, for example, Easingwold, Grassington, are achieving high levels of availability but with very few people, and that just really demonstrates the commitment that we've got from staff on those stations. So we are going to analyse this very closely and issue some letters of thanks to certain stations and indeed primary employers on those stations as well.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good. I mean, the primary employers play a big role in all of this, don't they? And it would be, you know, good to find a way to publicly recognise them for the contribution that they make, because they do make a really important contribution.
Yeah, we went through a similar process with specials when we were trying to get specials sort of released or more sort of promoted within their workplaces. So might be something.
There is something in that. In fact, I was at Hawes last night, and the Wensleydale Creamery
Yeah.
employs
Yeah,
at least 3 of the on-call firefighters in Hawes. And we've exchanged tweets today between myself and the creamery about how much they get from employing those on-call firefighters and what they get in terms of their commitment to their local community and what we get in terms of available fire engines. And you look at Hawes, and it's constantly between 99 and 100% availability. And that's in large part down to the support of those employers who, particularly during the daytime, are willing to release their staff.
Yeah.
And we're willing to work with those employers to find out ways in which we can do that more effectively.
I mean, there's a whole national element of employer-supported policing for citizens in policing, and there's a launch event on the 8th of May in Manchester where there's some fairly big companies now who are supporting staff to have time off to do special constabulary duties. So it's a very similar, there's a whole groundswell and very much supported by the Minister.
And Howden's Joinery from the fire side of things are an enormous supporter of on-call firefighters being released from their workplaces. And we're now using Howden's as an exemplar really of how we can work effectively with employers to maintain availability.
I mean, it is interesting because but the problem with North Yorkshire is that there are some areas where there just are not any big employers.
That's right.
You know, so you've got, you know, I mean, looking at, say, Summerbridge, you know, I mean, there aren't any big, apart from farms, and they're not all single employers that you can, you know what I mean, they just don't exist.
But at the moment, with the type of fire engines we've got across our organisation, they need a minimum crew of 4.
Yeah.
Now, we might do something in future that would enable us to reduce the minimum crew but still be able to mobilise with 4 if we had those available. But I refuse to believe that in that in a place like that, there aren't 4 people in that town 24 hours a day who aren't capable of being an on-call firefighter. We haven't attracted them in the past, and we need to know why we haven't attracted them.
Well, we haven't attracted very many women, have we?
We haven't. And,
so that's half the population.
These are the areas.
And these are the exact areas that we need to tackle.
Yeah. Okay.
So looking at the at 3.8, we recognise that we don't have a response standard, and that's something that we do need to work on in the future, and certainly within the RMP we will develop a response standard. But Table 5 shows our response averages over the last 12 months, and the overall average is 10 minutes and 14 seconds. It's quicker for shift stations and day crewed, and the on-call RDS element is obviously longer because those people have got to turn in from their homes and workplaces. Number of factors that can affect them, you know, how long it takes to book mobile, how long it takes to go to an incident, and so on.
Despite not having a standard, John, how comfortable are you with those times? Is that what you'd expect?
An average of 10 minutes is relative compared to other services of similar size.
Can I ask, why are day crews slower than shifts?
So on an evening, on a day crew station, the staff respond from home.
Right, okay.
So during the day, they might be good.
During the day, they'll be on the
average
station.
is skewed by
okay,
the
so
evening.
it's the word day crew is slightly misleading in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Moving on to section 4, which is our prevention. We carried out 3,263 home fire risk checks and safe and well visits during the year, compared to a previous year of 2,945.
I'm sure. Do you know how many of those are safety checks versus safe and well?
So safe and well, 1,183. Home fire risk checks, 2,080. So safe and well are now forming a large proportion. At 4.2 and beyond, there is some work there about how the types of property we're visiting, and so 1,200, which is around 40%, didn't have smoke alarms fitted. So that's an area that we've certainly got to concentrate on.
That's quite
Twen-
That's high.
It is
It
high,
is.
which is a really
Yeah.
positive figure because it means we're targeting our efforts
Yeah.
well onto the houses that are least likely to have them. Because generally, smoke alarm ownership is much higher than 60%. I think it's in the 90% is generally average. So there's clearly something being done well in targeting.
Difficulty in escaping from fires. 21% of homes we visited suggested they would maybe find it difficult to struggle to escape. An area that we've just managed to tap into now here is with Harrogate Borough Council, Scarborough Borough Council, we've now managed to achieve a data sharing agreement. So we've got data on assisted wheelie bins, which suggests that if someone's needing assistance there's a vulnerability issue, a mobility issue, and they're the types of data then we've got that data, we can target our resources accordingly. We need to work on the other local authorities to get the same, but that's a real positive from both districts there. And then the other one at 4.4, 19% of homes visited, smoking was identified, and obviously smoking is a risk factor. Business protection, this is where we carry out fire safety audits within a business community. Compared to the previous year, this is a reduction. We carried out 1,767 in 2017-18. We carried out 1,112 in the last year.
Which is a big reduction.
It's a fairly big reduction. The only thing at the moment, and again we need to dig into this more so to understand why, but within 2017 we did have Grenfell Tower. Following Grenfell we had a big concentrated effort on visiting houses in multiple occupation, high-rise properties, and certainly we did a big action plan within North Yorkshire to focus our attentions there.
Okay, so that's interesting then, because a building doesn't necessarily then equate to households, does it? If you're looking at HMOs and flats and all the rest of it.
That's right. So we would look at the common areas of those properties, which would then fall under an audit. So we went out as part of a public reassurance exercise and visited all of those within the districts. Each district manager was tasked with identifying properties to go to and go. That was immediately after Grenfell. And it was a national exercise, really.
Because my immediate reaction to that would be whether or not there had been some reduction in resources around the numbers of people able to contact those business fire safety checks, and whether that was a consequence of that.
We have within that time we had one watch manager which diverted over to prevention, and that's a temporary measure. So whether again we need to do some analysis on this to understand the context behind that.
Last question from me, Julia. I don't suggest they're connected, but 60% of fires going up which clearly aren't in domestic houses, because that's come down, and there's been less intervention in businesses over the last year than you might have liked. Just might be worth looking at those things.
Worth investigating if there's a causal effect. You wouldn't expect it in such a short time period.
But you might see the impact next year as well.
And certainly the inspectorate in their tranche 1 inspections of 14 fire and rescue services, I think, identified the problems created by the large reduction in the size of protection teams. It's an issue that HMI have picked up on.
Right, great.
Okay. And the final one there at 5.2 just demonstrates the type of activity which results as a result of some of the audits. That can be enforcement, prohibition or prosecution. We carried out 9 prosecutions carried out 2 prosecutions, 5 in the previous year, but that denotes the type of, that could be perceived as being good because whereas Leicester, we haven't come across the problems which we've come across in the years before.
Just to flag you on 6.1, we don't tend to. It's that I think that's
No,
probably
I
hangover.
know.
Okay, yeah,
I was
okay.
going to raise that
Fine,
afterwards,
okay.
not now. Yeah.
We don't know the content.
No. Okay, great.
Phil's absconded, so I think Kieran's got the clicker.
Kieran, fantastic. Thank you, Kieran.
Um,
So clearly we've also had some recent stats, haven't we? ONS stats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
National crime stats.
National crime stats.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just.
So they've been published.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Just wanted to flag that.
Yes.
I won't go into masses of detail. I'm conscious that we're,
Yeah.
we're
Well,
just a little bit past the time.
I don't think we're doing too badly. Simon, have we got any?
None yet.
No. Right. Okay. So we've got until 4 o'clock. So
Okay.
I think you'll
Don't go too fast.
be all right for some time.
It'd be more of a trot than a canter.
Okay.
So if I may, I'll take us to slide 3 and just touch upon mental health if I can. Relatively static in terms of the numbers of incidents, although gone up in the last month of reporting. We're starting to see improved accuracy in terms of tagging incidents within the force control room, which is helpful for us in terms in respect of being able to signpost officers to the right information, threat and risk management and similar, which is a positive. And just to pick up in terms of the use of custody as a place of safety, you'll note that there were 3 in March. Each of those 3 came to light when the person had already been arrested and was in custody anyway.
Okay.
So custody became an initial place of safety, and those individuals were then removed to a more appropriate location, not surprisingly YDH.
So basically we're called to incidents where it's not apparent that there's a mental health issue. So we go to a normal call for service, and it's not until they get booked in at the custody desk that it becomes apparent that they've got mental health concern.
Can I just flag it? We didn't have the actions today, but I haven't heard from Ed.
Right, I'll
reviewing.
take that back up between Leanne and myself to get Ed to reaffirm the invite.
Because every single case is looked at, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah,
Individually.
For me to
Yeah.
be part of that. It might be buried in my PNN emails that I have less access to. But so
Right,
that might
okay.
be my
Well,
caveat.
I'll make sure it gets across to
Thank you.
the office number.
Be Rich Ogden.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah, Rich, but we'll
Right.
sort it out.
Oh, okay.
And then I think I move to slide number 4, and you will see that the amount of time and effort going into mental ill health matters continues to be significantly greater than the normal type of incident that we attend, which doesn't have that attendant vulnerability factor. Importantly, though, after a blip last month, we've seen an increase again in terms of ambulance being used as a main method of conveyance, which is good to see. And I think, as Phil had described in the meeting last month, we did think it was just a particular blip, but we've returned back to something closer to normal service. And I think it's good to see that the officers on the ground, where they can support YAS in terms of getting people in a safe way to hospital or other areas, and conducting a proper risk assessment and doing that rather than leaving the person in crisis on the street.
On that note, Karen, now it's more likely that some detainees may be taken across the border to a place of safety that's closer, like Darlington.
Yes.
Are our ambulance colleagues less likely to do that?
We haven't particularly noticed that. I mean, the feedback from officers on the ground is that we're seeing extended deployments on account of the travel. And what we're also starting to pick up is a consequential impact at YDH because of the number of beds that are there and the facility that's available, and they're not being able necessarily to take detainees through as quickly as they would have done if they'd have just been catering for York and its immediate vicinity. Entirely predictable from the Friarage and Harrogate, and there is a significant disconnect between the plans to open up the new facility in York. I think it's going to be
It's only one bed though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So having that set against not necessarily having the proper street triage availability across the rest of the force area. So that disconnect in terms of service available to people in crisis is a difficult one for us, which we'll continue to manage. I think we're probably about 3 months in, I think, now into that, so it's reasonable, I think, between sort of me and the partnership hub for us to have a look at a little bit, I guess a little bit of a review of what that first quarter looks like and bring that back into an appropriate forum for discussion.
So I don't know when the next mental health crisis care concordat meeting is, because the last one was cancelled.
It's in the next couple of weeks.
It's coming up, isn't it?
Yes.
So anything that you can do in advance of that meeting to give us some indication of the effects would be helpful, wouldn't
The
it?
18th rings a bell.
Yeah.
I think Alex has done a lot of work with
Right.
Sam as well.
Yeah.
Keeping in touch with the teams that have put this in place, so that we're just monitoring the developments.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can pull a short briefing note together
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
both of you. That would help.
Yeah.
It's just a page or two
Yeah.
to help
Yeah.
sort of that. Well, it's developing understanding, isn't it, of
Yeah.
the other.
Particularly any links to triage as well, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of discussions about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
20th of May is the next day.
20th, is it? Right. Thank you,
do
Charlotte.
I'll do that today.
Can I ask an uncomfortable question? Are there any concerns nationally or in North Yorkshire that when you have less availability of something like this, that cops are less likely to classify someone as needing that support? So you hear nationally about appropriate adults, for example, that the difficulty in getting them for vulnerable adults makes some people less likely to request it, knowing it's going to make things slower, more complicated for everybody.
I think it's a reasonable question, but going back to the earlier part of the slides in terms of our improved identification of particular mental health vulnerability within the types of incidents we go to, it's more likely than not that identification will have come from the officer or staff member who's attended, because quite often mental health conditions or concerns aren't readily available to the call taker, the person who's managed the initial call, unless we know about them from previous experience in terms of them being marked on our systems. That sort of reflection of whether they're known to services or similar is likely to come from the officer, say Officer PCSO who attends. So,
I mean, as you're aware, we've done all the specific mental health training alongside our health professionals here, and I think the officers are probably more keen now than ever to identify that because they want people to be diverted into the right treatment, because otherwise you'll get this cyclical issue of they'll come to our notice again if they're not supported in the right way through those services. So I think people are more alive to the services that are available.
And I totally agree with that, and understand we also hear in feedback sessions, don't we, the impact mental health has on the front line and the frustration that brings with it, because often they think they shouldn't be the ones responding to it, and if it's taking more and more time to deal with them because there are less places of safety, and I just ask a question, but I'm reassured that
these people are right at the reading crises, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it's not like an officer could say, I'm going to do this instead.
Sure.
I can't imagine what else
I
could do.
I agree with you.
I think we'd probably hear less of the frustrations of the officers if they were trying to deviate from what the common course is.
Yeah.
The loud and clear message we get from patrolling staff is they are really struggling with the extended waits, trying to access other services and trying to get people through whatever the pathway that they need, whether that be neighbourhood officers or otherwise. I put some stuff out at the weekend doing some patrol work in York. Nearly every call that the neighbourhood officers took me to involved somebody who had some sort of community-based care around a mental health issue, which is bringing them into vulnerability or things like that. And one might argue in the past the service might not have seen that as police work, but the service of the 21st century, it is police work, it's what we do now.
I think there is some accountability from the officers in terms of holding other services to account now, rather than before when we really kind of took it apart. If ambulance wouldn't turn out, we would take that. But now, that escalation, do you know what would have worked that's been done with training the control room staff and the FIMs and the DMs? We're actually holding people to account, and they're appearing on our chief officer's log about when those challenges have gone in. So do you know what, that training and learning is having a real impact, and that's what you might see there in terms of the ambulance going to more than the standard 2 hours when it becomes a mental health issue.
But I think that the key thing for us to consider probably, and it isn't necessarily just a police thing to solve or even a statutory agency thing to solve, is the lack of availability of third sector facilities and support services to give people, not necessarily a mental health crisis, but people who are on the way down, that level of support to help them from plunging right into the sort of base of the trough. And that's a symptom of this sort of very difficult public sector commissioning landscape, isn't it? So I think neighbourhood officers are definitely trying to plug the gap as best as they can around that. Is it okay to move on?
Yep.
So I'm going to go across the 3 slides for the crime one and just then pick up antisocial behaviour, and then I'll come back to the crime slide at the end just to pick out an area if I may.
Yeah, that'd be great, Kieran. Can I just I have mentioned it before and I'll mention it again. It'd be really useful to have the crime version of the ASB slide.
Yes.
Yeah, because it just gives us, and also there was a red amber, a rag version of it, which just for the members of the public looking at it, you can get a real quick hit about where ups and downs and trends, and I just think that's helpful. I know we've had it to go back in time, but it was quite a good slide.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll pick that up. So I'll move past those and then just pick up in terms of all crime for the force. You'll see that we're busy at weekends. That's not necessarily something that is new to us. And the thing that probably concerns me most in terms of presentation is the rise in burglary, which you'll see across. I'm pushing forward through to the end. You'll see that it's up pretty much everywhere across the force, and it's a symptom both of the city and the county in terms of rural and urban. Really keen to get the additional volume crime teams in place from the extra precept money, and the recruitment starts for that during the course of this week, with a view to us getting some detective and uniform resource into tackling those volume inquisitive crime issues. We've got some good learning, particularly at York. You'll see that their increases is quite small compared to other parts of the force. They've had a dedicated burglary coordinator there, which we're looking to replicate that out in other parts of the force area. So taking that learning on from what Dave Ellis at the DCI has done there, and we've actually brought that was a temporary post that's been brought substantively into the establishment moving forward. So we're looking to see some improvements in that regard for burglary in particular.
So can I just say that in all of there's 2 things that are cropping up in surgeries now: burglary and drugs. Those are the two big issues that are coming up regularly. In fact, I am really concerned around both of them. I've never had so many comments about drugs. It's really, really concerning.
No, again, from that, I think we're finding it is a little bit of a tale of 2 halves in relation to drugs in particular. We've got some real good expertise within the City of York around closure orders and similar types of preventative approaches, which aren't replicated across the county. And the district councils, because of size and scale, just haven't come across it as much. Selby did their first one last week, so hopefully we'll start to see a little bit of momentum around that. And then the same for us in terms of particularly around Harrogate, Craven, and then into Scarborough around some of the activity around county lines and getting premises closed more quickly to enable us to disrupt and divert activity.
I mean, one of the things I'm a bit concerned about with drugs is certainly the people who come to the surgeries are not reporting it to the police. Every time I say, have you told the police? They go, oh no, there's no point. And that is a consistent piece of feedback, and we know that from other things that we've done, but I think when people see it going on, so they just they know the local hotspots, and they are not necessarily telling the local officers.
I mean, I think from our perspective, and certainly me, whenever I've done any press and media work, anything of that nature, I've encouraged people to report, because although we might not be able to respond to the specific incident at the key moment, it helps us build our intelligence picture.
Exactly.
And what we're finding is that we are struggling at times to be able to swear out warrants of court, partly because we haven't been able to present a compelling enough case through the lack of intelligence that we're getting. So certainly from a community perspective, I'm grateful that this is a public and televised meeting. we want people to report any and every piece of drugs intelligence to us so that we can make use of it in terms of building case against offenders. Because the knock-on effect for us, it takes us longer to disrupt if we can't get the intelligence in a timely way.
I think the difficulty with the drugs picture is that people are living in these communities, they see it all the time, they might start out by reporting every single incident, and because they don't see an immediate response to that, people give up reporting it. And I would really encourage anybody watching this and obviously subsequent reporting on this meeting, sometimes we have to build the intelligence picture in order to get a long-term solution through the criminal justice procedure. So it seems to people like there's nothing going on, when actually if we persisted and built the intelligence case and swore the warrant out, we could see a longer term solution for that community. But I understand the threshold of people giving up happens before we get a chance to build that intelligence picture. So it's a real encouragement to communities, isn't it? Keep reporting even though it seems like nothing immediate is happening, because it will create a longer term opportunity through the criminal justice process to do something about it.
I think the police could. The other thing we hear about a lot is the that sort of feedback loop. So not necessarily, but information coming to the police, and often on drugs in particular, where the public don't know if you're doing something or not because it's covert, most likely.
Yes.
But that, I don't think it always stops the police telling you we can't tell you what it is, but we are actively trying to deal with that for you. That gives some reassurance to members of the community that things are happening, even if you can't see it. I think it could be a bit more of that sometimes.
Certainly take away giving greater encouragement to particularly the neighbourhood officers at community meetings to go back and provide a little bit more of that closure on the feedback loop of where drugs warrants have been executed, where stop searches have been undertaken, things such as that based on community intelligence.
I think also I just want to highlight the issue of quad bike thefts as well, because they are going like hotcakes at the minute, and it really, particularly at this time of year in lambing, it's really challenging for farmers. Really challenging for farmers.
Well, and just to I met the NFU last week. They think there'll be much less of this last 2 weeks, 3, 4 weeks. Because they're on them so much, farmers are using their quad bikes 24/7 because it's lambing season. So if you see them come down this month, that might be the reason why not, because we're necessarily found the right.
No, we'd understand that. I mean, I've spent some time out with the Rural Task Force. We've had some successes in pockets of the force, but it's very much a case of following the football around the force area, where we might get a particular spate with Cleveland nominals coming down. And notably, and interestingly, for the first time in a number of months, Cleveland have gained some success in terms of the recovery of bikes and arrests just across the border to the north, which was pleasing to see. But then we then pick up out in sort of, particularly in Richmondshire of late, I think, and then the sort of top part of Craven into the Dale.
I mean, Craven, they've just been hammered.
But we have refocused the Rural Task Force across into that area to give us more reach and so on, including the deployment of other tactics to enable us to try and get on top of it more. So if I just very briefly scale back and just hopefully just pick out an item within the operational sphere around public safety and welfare in particular, I just wanted to pick out some positive news in relation to partnership work and about the reduction in missing people. You'll see that that's across all of the areas. We're starting to see a stronger contribution in relation to our return visits, both from the officers who are doing that initial sort of safety type visit, and then the follow-up from other services. So particularly for looked after children, we're starting to see some improvement in that area. It's by no means the finished article, and we'd like to reduce it even further, but that's a big help for us, and we will sort of continue in that particular vein if we can. And then if there aren't any other questions, I'll just pick up a little bit on contact management, just to cover that if I've got a moment.
Have we got any questions, Simon, yet?
No, not yet.
Right, well, we're all right then, we can crack on.
Okay, you'll see that during the course of March our performance has fallen away slightly in relation to both 999 and 101 contact, but that's in the context of continued increased demand, which is higher than this time last year. Again, we're starting to see that through the course of each of the months for this year in both of those areas. but you'll see that we do continue to maintain answer times under 10 seconds for 999 calls, and we are only falling to our secondary lines on very, very rare occasions, which is, continues to be a positive in the face of increased demand in that area. And then in relation to the 101 calls, again, higher demand for our services set against this time last year, and ever so slightly you'll see the speed of answer has fallen away again, but an extra 2,000 calls during the month of March.
So the obvious question relates to the Transform 2020 changes, and
that was my next bit.
Yeah, all right.
So in relation to the Transform 2020 changes, we've just come out of formal consultation with the staff associations and have some revised working patterns and practices agreed. They are now with the workforce to vote upon in terms of which is the preferred route from the staff side. That will conclude on or around the 5th of May in terms of the consultation element with the workforce. And we hope to be able to give notice to staff of our changing working patterns as a starting point before the 10th of May, which will mean that we'll be within a 3-month consultation period or 3-month notice period to move staff to the new arrangements. We started to put the workforce into the right set of pots to be able to do work more efficiently, effectively, set against the financial constraints we have. And that not only will that give us a better means of doing our work, it will help us bring about some of the administrative backlogs that we have and bring them down to support operational staff outside, but also give us a probably more malleable workforce in terms of being able to answer those routine 101 calls that come through, because we'll be able to move some trained staff across into that and support that in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So some positive signs there, but it is an iterative process there, and I'm confident that, especially now we've brought in new member staff to help us draw together public contact in all its forms, front desks and similar, we'll start to join that activity up in a better way.
I mean, I think the critical thing for us in the business case is the business case looks at a more efficient use of resource. The aim is to build on the performance improvements,
yes, exactly.
And I think the really critical thing is this has taken a huge amount of time and effort and personal commitment from the staff in the control room and the people in and around those changes, and that has to continue, as opposed to the business case seeing any sort of dip in performance as a result of some of those changes. So I think the reassurance is that the performance will be closely monitored throughout those changes, and the changes have been achieved as a result of a more efficient shift pattern, as opposed to reducing the number of resources that can answer calls for service in the control room.
Okay, so we just need to keep a very close eye on that, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we're supposed to be finishing right now. So, Lisa, did you have a comment on the HR stats?
Yeah, so we haven't gone through the HR slides. The way they've been presented over a period of time now is very much about the organisation and how it tracks those numbers, and that's police officers, PCSO, staff recruitment into the organisation. But it's very much used for business purposes, and actually when you read it as a member of the public looking into the organisation, it doesn't actually answer the questions the public would want to know about how we're progressing against particularly some of the precept conversations around increasing our numbers. So we're going to look at presenting a slide that is much more user-friendly from the public's perception of how are we tracking against the increase in recruitment of those officers and the PCSOs into our communities for next meeting.
Thank you. All right. Amanda, is this your last PAM for a while?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, Amanda, and good luck
Thank you.
with your future endeavours over the border.
Thank you.
And Charlotte, this will be your last PAM too?
It is.
So thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody got anything else? No? No. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you.